It was the coldest night of the year, and all he wanted was to get his daughter home warm and safe. But then, under a flickering street lamp at a deserted bus stop, he saw her, a woman, trembling alone and clearly in trouble. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He just knew he couldn't walk away. What happened next changed everything. Before we begin, if heartfelt stories about second chances and unexpected connections move, you consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to stay connected, and trust me, this story is one you'll want to hear all the way to the end. Now, let's begin. Single dad stayed to help a sick woman at the bus stop. She whispered, "Tell no one. I'm the CEO." The wind howled down the empty street like it had something to say. Jack Miller adjusted the fraying scarf around his neck and pulled his daughter's hood up higher over her tiny ears. Sophie, only 9, leaned into him half asleep, her fingers wrapped around his calloused hand as they stood under the flickering bus stop light. "Is the bus really coming, Dad?" she mumbled, her breath fogging the cold air. "Yeah, sweetheart. Might be late, but it's coming." Jack gave her hand a gentle squeeze, hoping she couldn't hear the doubt in his voice. The night had dropped into the kind of cold that bit through denim and sank into bone. The city buses were unreliable at this hour, especially near the industrial edge of town. It was nearly midnight. Jack had just finished a double shift fixing warehouse conveyor belts. His boots were soaked through from the snowmelt inside the factory, and his body screamed for rest. But Sophie had insisted on coming to pick him up tonight. It was her way of getting more time with him, and he couldn't say no to her quiet eyes. Then, from the far end of the bench came a sound. A cough. Weak. Then another. Jack turned, barely catching sight of a figure hunched over at the other end of the bus shelter, someone he hadn't noticed before. A woman sat curled in on herself, shivering under the thin fabric of what looked like a silk blouse and slacks. No coat, no gloves. Her long, dark hair clung damply to her cheeks. From her high heels, kicked halfway off to the dried blood at her temple, everything about her screamed wrong place, wrong time. Jack's instincts kicked in. He stepped toward her, cautiously tugging Sophie to his side. "Ma'am," he asked. "You okay?" No answer. Only a slow, shaking breath. Jack bent down, catching the woman's face under the flickering light. Her skin was pale damp with sweat despite the cold. He reached out and gently touched her forehead. Burning. "She's got a fever," he muttered. Then louder. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, bloodshot and unfocused. She looked at him. Really looked at him for one fleeting second. And then, almost inaudibly, she whispered, "Tell no one. I'm the CEO." Jack blinked. "I'm sorry." "What?" But her eyes had already closed again. "Dad," Sophie whispered beside him, tugging his sleeve. "She's not okay." Jack exhaled sharply, glancing up and down the deserted street. No cars, no taxis, no buses. The nearest hospital was over 30 minutes away on foot, and he wasn't about to leave this woman freezing here. "Okay," he said, making a decision. "Help me with her." Together, he and Sophie managed to support the woman, her weight surprisingly slight against his shoulder. She groaned softly but didn't resist. Her breath was shallow-labored. Jack took off his coat and wrapped it around her, gritting his teeth against the cold. "Hang on, lady. We're not letting you freeze to death." Jack's apartment wasn't much. A second-floor walk-up above an old laundromat with peeling linoleum and a heating system that rattled like it had asthma. But it was warm and clean and more than this stranger had at that moment. He laid her gently on the worn couch while Sophie fetched a blanket from the hall closet. Jack knelt beside the woman, brushing damp strands of hair from her cheek. He noticed now that her earrings' tiny, tasteful diamonds had been ripped, one missing a bit of dried blood at the lobe. This wasn't just a bad night out. Something had happened. Sophie returned with the blanket and tucked it carefully around the woman's shoulders, her small hands trembling. "Is she gonna die?" she whispered. Jack looked at his daughter. So serious. Too old for her age. "No," he said firmly. "Not on my watch." He went to the kitchen and returned with a cold compress. As he placed it on the woman's forehead, she stirred. "Water," she croaked. Jack helped her sit up and held a glass to her lips. She drank greedily, coughing after the first few sips. "Where am I?" she asked hoarsely. "Safe," Jack replied. "My apartment. You were at the bus stop." Freezing. She looked at him, then really looked. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. But there was something fragile there, too. Something cracked beneath the surface. "I didn't mean to end up there," she murmured. "I just walked. I didn't want them to find me." "Who?" Jack asked, his voice low. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned back into the couch cushions, exhaling a shaky breath. "Thank you," she said after a long pause. "But, please, don't tell anyone I was here, or who I am." Jack studied her, even disheveled her posture, her words. "Tell no one I'm the CEO. They didn't come from someone ordinary. There was power in her somewhere under the bruises and the heat of fever. Power and fear." "I don't even know your name," he said. She hesitated. "You don't need to," she replied. Jack sighed. "All right, then I guess I'll just call you Mystery." That almost got a smile. Almost. Sophie curled up nearby, her head on a pillow, fighting sleep. Jack sat in the armchair across from them, watching the stranger's chest rise and fall under the old wool blanket. He didn't know who she was, or why she was running, but something told him. This night, this moment, was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could imagine. And outside, under the broken street lamp, the bus never came. By morning, the storm had passed, but the cold lingered in the bones of the city. The heat from the old radiator ticked and clanked, barely keeping pace with the chill seeping through the window panes. Jack stood at the stove, stirring a pot of instant oatmeal, glancing every so often at the woman still sleeping on his couch. Sophie sat at the small kitchen table, swinging her legs, her hair a mess of tangles and her cheeks pink from the cold bathroom tiles. She cradled her favorite chipped mug, half full of hot chocolate. "Dad," she whispered, "do you think she's a real CEO?" Jack poured the oatmeal into two mismatched bowls. "I don't know, Bug. I've met some corporate types. They don't usually pass out on bus benches." Sophie wrinkled her nose. She looked scared last night, like she was hiding. Jack nodded, but said nothing. The woman's whisper still echoed in his mind. "Tell no one I'm the CEO." The plea in her voice hadn't sounded like pride, it had sounded like desperation. He walked over and gently knelt beside her. She looked more peaceful in daylight, though her skin still held a faint flush. Her hair framed her face like she'd once paid good money for it, but now it was matted strands stuck to her forehead with sweat. As if sensing him, her eyelids fluttered open. "Good morning," Jack said quietly. She sat up fast, blinking at her surroundings. Her breath caught as her gaze darted from the mismatched furniture to the unfamiliar ceiling. "Where you're safe," he said quickly, hands raised in reassurance. "This is my place. You passed out last night. It was freezing out. I didn't think twice." She exhaled shakily and nodded. "I remember. You and your daughter. Sophie." He smiled slightly. "She's got a better bedside manner than I do." The woman blinked, and for a moment something in her expression softened. Jack handed her a glass of water. "You had a fever. It's broken now, but you still look like you got hit by a train. You need rest." "I can't stay," she said immediately. "I've already been here too long." Jack didn't argue. He wasn't about to hold her hostage, but he gestured toward her clothes, still damp and clinging, and added, "At least wait until your pants stop freezing to your legs." She glanced down and cracked the faintest smile. "I'm Jack, by the way," he said. "Not sure if I mentioned that." She hesitated. "Claire." He raised an eyebrow. "That your real name?" Claire met his eyes steady now and replied, "For today it is." Jack gave a slow nod. "Fair enough." Sophie patted over, carrying a steaming mug carefully in both hands. "I made you tea. It's peppermint. Daddy says it helps when you're sick." Claire blinked at her, caught off guard. "Thank you," she said softly, taking the mug. Her hands trembled slightly. "You don't have to tell us anything," Jack said after a moment. "But you should eat something before you go." Claire looked like she wanted to refuse, but the smell of oatmeal, warm and sweet, tugged at something in her. She nodded faintly, and Jack motioned to the table. They ate mostly in silence, Claire, cautious Sophie, chattering a little about school and her drawings, blissfully unaware of the tension hanging in the air. Jack watched Claire out of the corner of his eye. She ate slowly, with the delicate grace of someone used to fine meals but too hungry to care about decorum. She finally pushed her bowl away and stood wobbling a little. Jack was at her side in a second. "You sure you're up for walking?" he asked. Claire straightened. "I don't have much of a choice." "Is someone looking for you?" he asked gently. "Because you don't look like you were just out for a jog." She flinched at the question. Jack raised his hands again. "Okay, none of my business. I get it. But let me help, even just a ride somewhere." Claire hesitated for a long beat, then shook her head. "No. If I show up anywhere I'm expected, they'll bury me in meetings and cameras and a PR cleanup crew before I can breathe." Jack frowned. "Sounds like you're not just a CEO. Sounds like you're escaping something." Her lips pressed into a line. "I made some enemies. Trusted the wrong people. Now they think I'm the problem." She looked away. "And maybe I am." Jack saw the tightness in her jaw, the way she stared at the floor like it might swallow her. There was pain in her, deep and personal. He knew that look he'd worn it himself the day they lowered his wife's casket into the ground. "Look," he said, keeping his voice level, "you don't owe me anything. But people like you don't just end up at a bus stop in a silk blouse unless they've hit a wall hard. If you need somewhere to be invisible for a while, this place ain't glamorous, but it's quiet, and we don't ask many questions." Claire's eyes met his, something unreadable flickering behind them. She seemed to be measuring him, not just his words, but his intent. He let her see that he meant every word. Sophie tugged Claire's sleeve. "You can use my blanket if you want. It's really soft." Claire looked down at her, blinking fast. Her voice cracked slightly when she said, "That's very kind of you." Jack didn't press her again. He just gave her space and brought out a pair of his late wife's sweatpants and a hoodie from the hall closet. "They'll be big," he said, setting them on the couch, "but warm. There's a towel in the bathroom if you want to freshen up." She paused at the threshold, then turned back. "Why are you doing this?" Jack met her gaze. "Because last winter a guy named Eli gave me a ride when my car broke down in a snowstorm. Said, we're all just one bad night from needing each other." I never forgot that. Claire held his eyes for a long time, then nodded once quietly, accepting something neither of them had words for yet. And as the bathroom door clicked shut behind her, Jack leaned against the kitchen counter, exhaled deeply, and muttered under his breath, "Just one bad night." He had no idea how true those words were about to become. It was nearly noon by the time Claire stepped out of the bathroom wearing Jack's oversized hoodie and sweatpants. Her damp hair was combed back and she looked marginally less ghostly, though her eyes still held a wariness that didn't match the softness of the clothes she wore. The hoodie swallowed her slender frame, but somehow it suited her, a woman stripped of her armor, no longer surrounded by glass walls and assistants, just human for once. Sophie sat on the floor by the coffee table drawing, with markers, legs crossed beneath her like a pretzel. She looked up with a wide smile. "You look better," the girl chirped, "less like a ghost." Claire let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," Sophie assured her, turning back to her drawing. "I'm making a map of where I'd live if I had a lot of money. It has trees and a goat farm and a candy store that gives out free jelly beans every Wednesday." Claire walked slowly to the couch and sat watching her. Jack appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He caught the sight of Claire settled in the slightest flicker of relief passing over his face. "Soup's on," he said. "Well, if you count canned tomato and grilled cheese as soup." I count it as a miracle, Claire said, and she meant it. They sat around the tiny fold-out table, knees nearly touching eating from chipped bowls. Claire ate slowly again, and Jack didn't push her to talk, though the questions clawed at him. It was Sophie who broke the silence. You don't look like the people Dad used to work for. Jack stiffened just slightly. Claire looked at him intrigued. What kind of work? Engineering, Jack said simply. Maintenance stuff. Industrial systems. Did 15 years in a plant that made parts for shipping lines. Got fired? Claire asked, not judgmentally, but matter of fact. He nodded. Filed a report when a supervisor cut corners on safety inspections. 2 weeks later, they restructured. He sipped his soup. The guy I reported ended up with my job. Go figure. Claire's grip on her spoon tightened. Sounds about right. Big company? She asked after a pause. Jack glanced at her suspicious for the first time. Yeah. One of the Hartwell subsidiaries. Why? Claire lowered her eyes to her bowl. No reason. He watched her, something shifting behind his gaze. You said your name's Claire. Yes, she said, not meeting his eyes. You also said you're a CEO? I did. But there's no Claire listed among the top execs at Hartwell or any of the majors, Jack added evenly. Sophie blinked between them. Is this like a riddle? Claire set her spoon down slowly. No. This is the part where you start putting things together. Jack leaned back in his chair. Go on. I wasn't lying, Claire said, voice lower now. I just didn't want to be found. Evelyn Claire Hart. That's my full name, legally, but everyone knows me as Evelyn Hart. Jack sat in stunned silence. You're Evelyn Hart, he said slowly, of Hartwell International. She nodded. Yes, and I left. He stared at her soup, forgotten. You left your company, I disappeared, she clarified. Or tried to. The board wants me out. They've been maneuvering for months. Public scandal over something my brother did, they pinned it on me. I got tired of spinning half-truths and smiling through blood. But why here, he asked. Why not a hotel, a lawyer, a friend? Because they'd find me. Because I needed. She paused. I needed a place where nobody expected me to be human. Sophie had gone quiet. She looked between them again and softly asked, But you are human. You just needed help like anybody. Claire blinked at her hard. Then she whispered, You're right. I just forgot what it felt like to be helped. Jack exhaled, rubbing his temples. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Claire replied. You helped me before you knew who I was. That's all I needed. There was a long pause. Jack finally stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the alley below, the slush melting in patches under a gray sky. His reflection in the glass looked tired, older than his years. You know what's funny, he said quietly. I spent years thinking people like you only saw people like me when you needed something. Claire stood too moving next to him. And now I'm still not sure, he admitted. She looked at his reflection beside hers. Then let me show you. From her pocket, she pulled out a card. Sleek, minimal black with gold trim. Jack didn't take it. I'm not looking for favors, he said. This isn't a favor, Claire replied. It's a thank you, and maybe a way to level the field. I'll be gone tonight. I just didn't want to leave without giving you something more than a ghost story. Sophie got up and walked over. She took Claire's hand and placed a folded piece of paper in it. It's our map, she said shyly. In case you ever want to find us again. Claire opened it. Crayon drawings of trees, goats, and jelly bean stores filled the page. But in the center she had drawn 3 stick figures under a roof, one tall, one little, and one with long hair and a tiny crown. Claire laughed, choked, and wiped at her eyes. I'll keep it, she said. That night, Claire Evelyn disappeared from their lives as quickly as she had arrived. No note, no goodbye, just a folded blanket, a cup cleaned and placed back where it had been, and Sophie's map missing from the table. But neither Jack nor Sophie would forget her. Not the way she looked when she finally smiled, not the way she stood by the window stripped of everything but her humanity. And somewhere in the city, under a different name, Evelyn Hart was beginning to remember who she was when she wasn't a CEO, someone who mattered, to someone who never even knew her name. Jack found the silence that followed Evelyn's departure heavier than he'd expected. For 3 nights he came home to a quiet apartment, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the void she'd left behind. Her name, Evelyn Hart, kept circling his mind like a song he couldn't shake. CEO of Hartwell International, a ghost at his bus stop, a woman who had asked not to be known. But Sophie missed her most. "Do you think she's safe?" she asked one evening while coloring at the coffee table. "I hope so," Jack said gently. She didn't look like someone who had anyone, Sophie murmured almost to herself. Jack paused at the kitchen sink, the sponge frozen mid-scrub. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Jack pulled out the folded newspaper Mrs. Delaney had slipped under his door that morning, like she always did when she found something interesting. On the front page, a headline stretched across the top in bold, "CEO Evelyn Hart returns amid internal turmoil at Hartwell." A photo below it showed Evelyn exiting a building flanked by security, her face pale but composed. There was no smile, just the tight professional expression he hadn't seen on her during her time in his home. He traced her image with his eyes. She looked nothing like the woman in the oversized hoodie sipping peppermint tea beside Sophie. She looked armored. Jack folded the paper carefully and slid it back under a stack of mail. The woman he'd met who had sat barefoot on his couch and asked for nothing but silence was still in there somewhere. He just didn't know if the world she'd returned to would let her stay. A week later, Jack was finishing a late-night repair job at a small auto shop across town when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered hesitantly. "Yeah." A familiar voice spoke on the other end. "You still eat grilled cheese?" Jack blinked. "Evelyn." There was a small laugh. "Only person I know who uses 4 slices of bread for 2 sandwiches." His chest tightened. "You okay?" "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I could use a quiet place for 15 minutes. Not to run, just to breathe." Jack looked at his tool bag, the grease on his hands, the work orders stacked on the desk. 15 minutes, he said. "I'll meet you halfway." They met at a closed-down diner on the edge of downtown. The neon sign still flickered open, out of habit though the windows were dark. Evelyn leaned against the hood of a parked sedan, arms folded across a wool coat that screamed money but didn't quite hide the fatigue in her eyes. She looked better, stronger, but also more brittle, as if each decision in the past week had cost her a piece of herself. "I didn't think you'd come," she said as he approached. "I didn't think you'd call," he replied. They stood in silence for a few beats. The air was crisp, the city around them buzzing softly with late-night life. "I've been back 8 days," she said. "And every hour someone's asking for a decision, an explanation, or a signature. You're the CEO," Jack said. "That's the job, right?" She looked at him. "It used to be. Before I became the distraction." He said nothing. She went on. "They want me out. Not officially, just quietly. A graceful exit. I came back to clean up the mess. But I think the mess is me now. That what they told you, that's what they show me. Every sideways glance, every closed-door meeting I'm not invited to anymore." She ran a hand through her hair. "I stood in a room full of people I once led, and not one of them asked if I was okay." Jack leaned back against a nearby bench. "And why would they? You're not supposed to be human. You're a brand." She smiled faintly. "Exactly." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then why'd you come back?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, "Because a little girl gave me a map. And I realized I didn't want to disappear. I wanted to find my way back." Jack swallowed hard. "She still has that map on her wall," he said. "Said if she hangs it up, you might come looking." Evelyn's lips trembled slightly. "She believed in me before I did." There was a beat of silence before Jack added, You don't have to let them win. What if I don't have a choice? You always do, he said. Even if it's just choosing who you let see the real you. Evelyn exhaled long and slow. It's hard to remember who that is. I spent so long building the image that I forgot the person underneath. Jack tilted his head. I didn't. She looked up. You're the woman who apologized for waking Sophie, who thanked me for soup, who said please when she asked for help even when she was barely standing. He paused. That's not someone I forget. Evelyn looked down, blinking quickly. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked, her voice raw. I'm not easy. Because I've been where you are, he said. Different stage, same script. Everyone wants something until you're no longer useful. She studied him like she was seeing him again for the first time. I don't want to be another powerful person who walks into someone's life and leaves it worse, she whispered. Jack smiled, small and sad. You already didn't. They stood in silence again, the cold beginning to seep into their bones. Evelyn took a slow breath. Would it be okay if I stopped by tomorrow? Just to say hi to Sophie. Maybe bring her some jelly beans. Jack gave a quiet laugh. She'd never forgive me if I said no. Evelyn nodded, her voice soft. Good. She turned to go, but paused. Jack. Yeah. I don't know where this is going, but thank you for seeing me. Jack met her eyes steady. That's what we do here. She smiled, really smiled for the first time in days. And under the quiet street lamp it was clear no matter what world she belonged to by title, this was the world where she had finally been seen, not as a CEO but as a person. The apartment felt warmer that morning, though the heater hadn't changed a thing. Jack stood at the stove, flipping pancakes while Sophie decorated the table with paper flowers she had cut out before school. She's coming today, right? She asked, balancing on a chair to place a drawing above her place setting. He glanced at the clock. She said she'd stop by. Sophie grinned, holding up a drawing of 3 stick figures under a sun with long yellow rays. I made us all look happy. Jack smiled, but said nothing. He didn't want to set expectations. The truth was, he didn't know if Evelyn would actually come. A part of him hoped she would. Another part prepared to explain to Sophie gently why some people made promises they couldn't keep. But at exactly 10:06, a soft knock echoed from the door. Sophie beat him to it, flinging it open like a spring breeze. Evelyn stood there in a long gray coat, holding a modest paper bag and a hesitant smile. She looked beautiful not in the polished press conference kind of way, but in the quiet way someone looks when they're where they want to be. Hi, she said. I come bearing jelly beans. Sophie gasped with delight and threw her arms around her. Evelyn laughed genuinely and hugged her back. I missed you too, kiddo. Jack watched from the kitchen, his arms crossed but relaxed. She met his gaze and nodded, grateful, steady. Breakfast was a mix of clumsy pancakes, syrup-stained drawings, and Evelyn's stories told just vaguely enough to protect her world, but warmly enough to let them in. Sophie chattered, bouncing between topics with 9-year-old velocity. Evelyn followed her pace effortlessly as if she had been there all along. Jack noticed how easily she fit, how natural it felt having her back in the room. After breakfast, Evelyn stood by the window cradling a cup of coffee. Sophie had gone to change into her school clothes, humming in the bedroom. You made this feel like home, Evelyn said softly, not looking at him. Jack leaned against the wall. You made it easy to let you in. She smiled faintly, then turned toward him. I didn't just come to bring jelly beans. Jack waited. Evelyn took a deep breath, the kind you take when you know something good is about to end. I have to leave town. Jack's posture stiffened. When? This afternoon. His voice was even, but the words caught. Why, there's a meeting in Chicago with the board. They're offering me a deal control over a new foundation branch if I agree to step down quietly from corporate leadership. Jack narrowed his eyes. And you're considering it? Evelyn nodded. It's the only way I can do something good with the resources I have, without being buried by their games. He studied her. "You sure this is what you want? Or is this just the best way to stop the bleeding?" "I don't know anymore," she said honestly. "All I know is I'm tired of pretending, and I want to build something that matters, Jack. Not just numbers and headlines. Something real." Jack walked over and stood beside her. "Then do it, but not because they told you to. Do it because it feels right." She looked up at him, her eyes uncertain. "I'm scared." He nodded slowly. "That means you still care." They stood quietly, shoulder to shoulder, not touching, but close enough to feel it. From the bedroom, Sophie called, "I'm ready." Evelyn glanced at the clock. "I'll walk with you." Jack picked up Sophie's backpack. Evelyn knelt down and helped the girl zip her jacket. On the sidewalk outside, Sophie looked up at Evelyn. "Are you coming back again?" Evelyn hesitated, then crouched down and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind Sophie's ear. "I hope so," she whispered. "But if I don't, you were the best thing that happened to me this year." Sophie frowned. "Why wouldn't you come back?" Evelyn gave a small smile. "Because grown-ups sometimes take a while to figure themselves out. But you helped me start." Sophie nodded solemnly like a small sage. "Okay, but don't take too long. Our treehouse plans need 3 people." Evelyn laughed through the ache in her chest. After Sophie climbed onto the school bus, Jack and Evelyn stood in the street, the hum of city life returning around them. "So, that's it?" he asked. She looked down. "For now. You didn't have to say goodbye. Most people don't." "I'm not most people," she said, stepping closer. "You know that now?" Jack nodded. "I do." Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded piece of paper. "This is the real offer they gave me, the one with all the strings attached. If I sign, I disappear from headlines and they make sure I never come back." Jack looked at it, then at her. "And if you don't, I fight. In court. In public. Alone." "You wouldn't be alone," he said quietly. She searched his eyes. "Would you mean that if I had nothing? No power, no title, just me?" Jack didn't blink. "I already did." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Then, maybe. I'll wait to sign." He stepped forward, brushing her hand as he took the paper. "Whatever you choose, don't vanish again. Not without telling us where the next bus is headed." Evelyn smiled bittersweet. "Deal." Then without another word she turned and walked down the street, tall, quiet, and not running this time. Not hiding. And though Jack watched her go, there was no finality in the moment. Just a pause in a conversation not yet finished. As the wind picked up Sophie's crayon drawing above the kitchen table, fluttered in the draft from the cracked window. The little stick-figure family beneath the sun held fast, taped gently to the wall. 3 people. 1 crown. Still waiting. Still hoping. Still believing that sometimes people do come back. Jack never read the morning paper anymore, but that day the headlines came to him anyway. Mrs. Delaney, his upstairs neighbor, knocked at his door before sunrise, holding the folded newspaper in one hand and a sympathetic look in the other. "You might want to see this," she said gently. Jack took it with a nod, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. Sophie stirred behind him on the couch, wrapped like a burrito in her blanket cocoon. The apartment smelled of leftover pancakes and lemon dish soap, a quiet morning waiting to start. He unfolded the paper slowly. Evelyn Hart's secret hideaway CEO allegedly disappeared to working-class apartment after scandal. A grainy photo dominated the front page. Evelyn in his coat, Sophie holding her hand, and Jack standing right beside them on the sidewalk. His name wasn't printed, but anyone who knew him would recognize the outline, the place, the truth. His jaw clenched. The article quoted unnamed sources and leaked internal memos. Words like unstable, reckless romantic entanglement unfit for leadership were sprinkled throughout like poison. Jack didn't need to read the rest. He folded the paper without a word. "Are they going to be mean to her now?" Sophie asked quietly from the couch, her big eyes fixed on him. Jack turned. "They already were." She was trying to be nice, Sophie said. She just wanted a minute to breathe. I know, Jack said, sitting beside her, but sometimes when people don't understand something good, they try to tear it apart. Sophie hugged her blanket tighter. She didn't deserve that. No, Jack said softly. She didn't. That afternoon, Jack's phone buzzed. Blocked number. He let it ring the first time, and the second. On the third, he answered. Jack, it's Tom Whitman. The name clicked instantly. Evelyn's longtime assistant. The one she said had tried to help, but was always caught between loyalty and survival. She's okay, Tom said quickly, physically, but she's not okay. Jack stood in the back of the auto shop wiping his hands on a rag, the article she found out an hour before it printed. The board leaked it. It was strategic. They want her to cave. Jack's voice dropped. And will she? I don't know, Tom admitted. But she's rattled. She hasn't said a word since she saw the photo. She just sat there staring at Sophie's map taped to her office wall. Jack closed his eyes, heart clenching. Where is she now? Still in the city. Still fighting, I think. But if you can... I think she needs someone who doesn't care about the brand. Jack didn't hesitate. Tell her I'm not hard to find. That evening, Jack stood alone in the darkened living room, Sophie already tucked into bed. The apartment hummed in its usual quiet rhythm. The wind knocked gently at the window pane. He looked down at the business card Evelyn had left behind the first time she vanished. Black with gold trim. Just a name and a number. No title, no shield. He hadn't called it, not once, until now. He picked up his phone and dialed. It rang, and rang, and rang. He was about to hang up when her voice came on low and fragile. Jack. There was a pause on his end. Not from hesitation, but from the flood of emotions he hadn't let himself feel until now. I saw the article, he said finally. She didn't respond. I'm sorry they came after you like that. I thought if I stepped away quietly they'd leave me with something, she whispered. But I was wrong. They wanted to break me. I didn't think they'd find you. Jack sighed. That part's not on you. That part's on cowards who don't know the first thing about real strength. Evelyn exhaled shakily. I'm scared, she admitted. I've never been scared like this before. Not when we went public. Not when we lost funding. But now it feels personal. Like I don't know where I end and the noise begins. You're still in there, Jack said. Beneath the press releases and the camera flashes and the boardroom daggers. You're still the woman who apologized to my daughter for waking her up. You're still the one who shared tea and couldn't finish her soup. She laughed just barely. That soup was awful. It was canned, he said. You were polite. I remember thinking she whispered that I hadn't felt safe like that in years. You were safe, Jack said. And you still are. But if you keep trying to play by their rules, they'll eat you alive. You need to rewrite the game. Silence. Then, would you help me? He hesitated for half a beat, not from doubt, but from the weight of what that promise might mean. Yes, he said, but only if we do it your way. Not theirs. I don't know what my way is yet. Then we find it together. Another pause. But this one felt different. Lighter. I kept Sophie's drawing, she said softly. It's the only thing in my office that reminds me who I want to be. She still thinks you'll come back. Do you? Evelyn asked, her voice almost too quiet. Jack took a breath. I don't think you ever really left. There was no reply. Just a soft, steady inhale like someone breathing again for the first time. Then the line disconnected. Jack stared at the phone for a long moment, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't need her to say anything more. She was still fighting, and this time she wasn't alone. It had been 5 days since the call. 5 days since Evelyn's voice, shaken but alive, had filled the quiet of Jack's apartment with something that felt like hope. But she hadn't called again. And Jack hadn't pushed. He told himself she was handling things, fighting her battle in boardrooms and back alleys of power he'd never see. He told himself she needed space, not saving. Still, every evening as he set the table for two, his eyes drifted to the third chair. The one she'd once pulled close without asking. The one Sophie insisted they leave empty. She might come by again, Sophie said one morning, brushing syrup from her chin. She liked the corner seat. Jack chuckled. She also said my coffee was a civil rights violation. Sophie giggled. That's because you use store-brand beans. Jack ruffled her hair and tried not to show how much he missed Evelyn's voice in that morning mix of toast and laughter. That afternoon, while Sophie was at school, Jack took a detour after work. His boots crunched down the sidewalk outside the Hartwell building, a sleek tower of tinted glass and polished stone. It looked like a different planet from the world he knew. He stood across the street, hands in his pockets, watching people come and go. No one glanced up. No one noticed him. And then, on the 14th floor, he saw it. A flash of paper, a taped-up drawing. Even from that distance he could see the colorful crayon sun, the stick figures, the crown. His heart stopped. She still had the map. The next day, Sophie came home from school with a box under her arm and a proud grin on her face. We made gratitude jars today, she announced, placing the glass container on the kitchen table. Inside were small folded notes, each written in Sophie's careful block letters. Jack picked one at random and read aloud. I'm grateful for grilled cheese even when Dad burns it. Sophie shrugged. It's still crunchy. Another read, I'm grateful for Evelyn's peppermint tea. Jack paused. Sophie looked at him. Do you think she's coming back? He hesitated. I think. She's figuring some things out. I could help her figure, Sophie said confidently. I'm really good at puzzles. Jack smiled, pulled her into a one-armed hug, and kissed the top of her head. That, you are Bug. That weekend, the first snow of the season, dusted the sidewalks. Jack spent the morning fixing a leaky radiator in the apartment next door. By the time he returned, Sophie had created a makeshift tea party with her stuffed animals. Peppermint or apple spice, she asked as he walked in, holding out a chipped teacup with imaginary contents. Before he could answer, someone knocked at the door. Jack froze. Sophie beat him to it again. This time she didn't fling it open. She opened it carefully like it might be a dream. And there she was. Evelyn. Hair slightly wind-tousled, cheeks pink from the cold, a soft wool coat buttoned neatly to her chin. But the real change wasn't in how she looked, it was in her eyes. They were clear, steady. She knelt to Sophie's level and held out a real tin of peppermint tea. I heard you might need a refill. Sophie beamed and threw her arms around her. Jack stepped forward, slowly, heart thudding. Evelyn stood and met his gaze. I didn't sign it, she said. He blinked. The deal. She nodded. They gave me 3 days to reconsider. I spent them rereading Sophie's map. Jack exhaled, and I remembered what mattered. Evelyn stepped inside. Her voice was calm but laced with emotion. They'll keep coming for me. The headlines, the pressure. But I've decided I'm not leaving myself behind this time. Jack swallowed. What are you going to do? Start over, she said. Not run, not disappear. Build something from the ground up. Something honest. Sophie tugged her hand. Like our treehouse. Evelyn smiled. Exactly like that. They sat at the tiny table with imaginary tea and paper napkins, and Jack couldn't help but laugh. You know, he said, this is probably the first board meeting you've ever attended where half the attendees are plush animals. Evelyn gave him a sideways glance. It's also the first one that doesn't involve a hostile takeover. The three of them sat there for a long time, talking, laughing, sharing silence that felt like music. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the kitchen window, Evelyn leaned back and said, I thought I had to choose between being someone powerful and being someone real. But maybe real is powerful. Jack nodded. It always was. You just forgot. Sophie brought over her gratitude jar and placed it in front of Evelyn. You can add something, she said. We don't keep score here. Evelyn looked at the jar, then slowly tore a corner from the envelope she'd brought the tea in. She wrote something, folded it twice, and dropped it inside. Jack caught her eye. "What did you write?" She smiled softly. "Just grateful to be seen." The table wasn't empty anymore, and it never would be again. The next morning, Jack woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee. Not his usual bargain bin grounds, but something richer, smoother. For a disoriented moment he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard a quiet hum from the kitchen and the soft clink of ceramic. Evelyn. She was barefoot, hair tucked behind her ears, pouring 2 cups with the ease of someone who belonged. Jack leaned against the doorframe and watched. "You always make yourself at home in other people's kitchens." She turned, arching a brow. "Only in kitchens with leaky faucets and subpar coffee filters." He grinned. "You fix the filter, I own 17 hotels. I can manage a drip machine." They sat at the table, the third chair, Sophie's still empty, while she slept in. Evelyn cupped her hands around the mug, not sipping yet. She seemed hesitant, thoughtful, like she was holding back a tide. Jack leaned in. "You didn't come back just to make coffee, did you?" Evelyn sighed, her smile fading. "No, I came because I need to ask you something." He braced. "What is it?" She pulled a folded document from her coat pocket and laid it on the table. It was an official board resolution. Hartwell's seal stamped in gold. A clause highlighted in yellow ink. Conduct unbecoming or behavior that compromises brand image. Jack skimmed the paragraph. "They're threatening you again. They're planning to force a vote. This time it's not about my leadership. It's about my personal choices." His eyes narrowed. "Us." She nodded. "The photo. The story. The fact that I disappeared into the life of a single dad with no corporate connections." Jack's jaw tightened. "So they're saying, you can't be seen with people like me. They're saying I'm a liability, that I've made myself too accessible, too ordinary." They're using words like emotionally compromised, unsuitable for visibility, and optics liability. He pushed the paper back toward her. "You don't need my permission to walk away from them." "I'm not asking permission," she said. "I'm asking if I walk away, will you be there when I land?" That question, so simple yet so heavy, hung between them. Jack stared at her, at the woman who had once hidden in the shadows of a bus stop, who had wept quietly into a borrowed blanket, who had served imaginary tea to a little girl who'd claimed her as family. "Evelyn," he said softly, "you walked away once already. And we never closed the door." She blinked. "So you'd still have me knowing what they're saying?" He gave a half laugh. "What they're saying doesn't scare me. What scares me is that you'd believe them." Evelyn dropped her gaze, biting her lip. "I don't. Not anymore. But I also don't want to be the reason your life gets complicated." Jack shrugged. "It already was. Then you showed up and gave it meaning." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Then I need to tell the board that I'm stepping down," she said. Jack's brows lifted. "Stepping down. Like permanently?" She nodded. "They want me to disappear into the foundation quietly. Fine, I'll do it. But not because they bullied me. Because I'm choosing a life with value beyond visibility. I want to build things from the ground up again. Truthfully. Simply." Jack nodded slowly. "You sure?" "No," she said honestly. "But I've never been more ready." That afternoon, the storm broke. News alerts hit every platform at once. Evelyn Hart steps down from Hartwell International in a stunning move, sources say. Personal scandal. Prompted exit, CEO allegedly emotionally compromised. Who is Jack Miller, the man in the CEO's final photo? His name was everywhere. His photo, grainy distant, was in the corner of the coverage, and so was Sophie's. Jack stood in the corner of the living room phone in hand, heart racing. Sophie, sitting cross-legged on the couch, looked up from her coloring. Did something bad happen? He shook his head, slow and steady. No bug. Just a lot of people paying attention now. Because of Evelyn. Yeah. She was quiet a moment, then asked, Do you still want her to come over for grilled cheese tonight? He smiled, more than ever. She arrived at dusk, not in a black car or with a briefcase, but on foot, wearing jeans, a soft sweater, and carrying a paper bag of groceries. I brought the good cheese, she said. Jack let her in. She kissed Sophie on the forehead, set the bag on the counter, and turned to him. You okay? She asked. I should be asking you that. I was expecting the storm, she said. I just didn't expect to feel lighter afterward. He stepped toward her. Because it's over. Because I didn't cave. They cooked together, laughing, burning one sandwich, feeding Sophie bites off the spatula. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't clean, but it was real. After dinner, they sat on the couch, Sophie asleep between them. Evelyn leaned her head on Jack's shoulder. You know, she whispered, for someone who used to run million-dollar campaigns, I've never felt more successful than I did tonight, spreading mustard on grilled cheese with a 9-year-old. Jack kissed the top of her head. That's because this is the first time you didn't have to perform for anyone. She nodded, eyes closing. And in that moment, quiet, unguarded Evelyn Hart was no longer a CEO, no longer a headline, no longer a public figure with a reputation to shield. She was just a woman, resting against the man who had seen her first in the dark before the world remembered her name. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of being ordinary. Jack hadn't expected things to change so quickly, but they did. The Monday after Evelyn's announcement, the world around him tilted. It started with whispers at the auto shop jokes at first, then curious glances. You're the guy from the photo, right? One customer asked, trying too hard to sound casual. Another mechanic nudged him during a break, grinning. Didn't know you had billionaire taste, Miller. Jack kept his replies short, his head down. The world loved a story like this, a single dad and a CEO, but they didn't see the nights when he stayed awake wondering if she regretted everything. If walking away from Hartwell would cost her more than she had bargained for. But Evelyn, in her own way, held steady. She didn't vanish again. Instead, she returned to Jack and Sophie's life not as a headline, but as a real person, stubborn, determined, and imperfect. She was there for dinners, for school drop-offs, for quiet walks through the park with Sophie holding both their hands. She started writing ideas for a non-profit on Jack's kitchen counter, with Sophie doodling stars around the margins. Still, Jack felt it, that slow friction of two worlds brushing against each other. He'd grown up around people who fixed things with their hands. She had grown up in rooms where people were taught to fix things with money strategy spin. And while Evelyn had chosen this new path freely, her past still lingered like a shadow. That Friday, as they sat around the table for dinner, Evelyn slicing apples while Sophie recited a story she'd written, Jack noticed Evelyn's phone vibrating face down on the counter. She hadn't touched it all evening. You gonna get that? He asked. Evelyn glanced at the screen, then shook her head. It's a reporter. Again. Probably about the foundation launch next week. You sure you're ready to be in the spotlight again? Jack asked gently. Evelyn paused, then said, This time, it's on my terms. But Jack wasn't just talking about press conferences. He meant this odd, beautiful triangle of man, woman, and child stitched together by chance and choice. After Sophie went to bed, Jack stepped onto the balcony, letting the cold air clear his head. Evelyn joined him a few minutes later, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. They stood silently looking out over the neighborhood. You ever feel like you're standing between two versions of yourself? She asked. All the time, Jack said. One that survived, and one that still wonders if that's enough. Evelyn nodded. I still get emails from board members, colleagues, old friends. Some tell me I'm brave, others say I'm foolish, that I threw it all away for a temporary romance. Jack looked at her. Is that what this is? Temporary, her eyes flickered. No, but it's unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things scare people, especially powerful ones. Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he asked, "Do you miss it?" The power. The control. Evelyn looked down considering. "I miss knowing exactly who I was in a room. I miss walking in and having people pause just because I said something. But I don't miss being alone in a room full of people." Jack studied her. And now she turned to face him fully. "Now I'm still figuring out who I am without the armor. But when I walk into this apartment, I don't need anyone to pause. I just need Sophie to smile and you to hand me a mug of bad coffee." He smirked. "Getting picky now, are we?" She laughed. "I said need, not prefer." They stood in silence again before Jack said, "I want this. You me, Sophie. But I need to know you're not looking back with regret." Evelyn stepped closer. "I'm not looking back, but I am learning how to live forward differently, more vulnerably." Jack touched her hand. "Good, because this life doesn't come with headlines. It comes with grocery runs and sick days and burnt toast." "You okay with that?" Evelyn nodded, her voice thick. "I'm okay with all of it, as long as it's with you." That weekend, Jack and Sophie helped Evelyn move a few things into a small shared workspace she'd rented with 2 other women, both former executives turned dreamers. The place had peeling paint, mismatched furniture, and a startup energy Jack recognized. "Kind of a downgrade from your old corner office," he joked as they carried in a box of donated laptops. Evelyn smiled, brushing dust from a second-hand chair. "I never needed the office. I needed permission to start over." She opened a drawer in the desk and placed something inside a crumpled piece of construction paper. Sophie's map. Jack watched her carefully. "You know, he said the world may not know what to make of you now. But Sophie already decided. She thinks you're royalty." Evelyn smiled through misty eyes. "Then I'll try to live up to that crown." He stepped forward, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You already have." In that quiet, imperfect room with its scratched floors and chipped mugs, they didn't need anyone else's permission. They had chosen each other. And in a world that demanded polish, their shared chaos felt like grace. Rain lashed the windows like a restless drummer as Jack drove through the early evening gloom, windshield wipers struggling to keep up. The old pickup creaked with every turn, but it held together like him held together by years of necessity, grit, and love. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, bundled in her raincoat, her feet barely touching the floor. Her backpack was soaked from where it had brushed the wet sidewalk. "I told Mrs. Hadley I'd bring Evelyn to Career Day," she said through a yawn. "She said CEOs are cool." Jack gave a half smile. "Evelyn's not a CEO anymore, remember?" Sophie shrugged. "She's still cooler than Mr. Davis, and he makes sausage at Costco." Jack laughed, the sound warm in the cab. "That she is." They pulled into their complex just as thunder cracked overhead. Jack opened Sophie's door, lifted her out, and carried her through the downpour. They were soaked by the time they reached the stairwell, laughing, breathless, dripping. As they reached the landing, Jack paused. The hallway was dim, but he saw it a silhouette hunched near the door. Evelyn. Her coat was soaked through her arms, wrapped tightly around herself, head bowed. Jack's heart froze. "Sophie," he said quietly, "go inside and change. I'll be right in." Sophie didn't argue. She sensed something wasn't right. Evelyn looked up slowly. Her eyes were rimmed red, her face pale, but it was her hands that caught him still trembling. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice low. "No." She shook her head quickly. "Not physically." He unlocked the door and guided her inside. She didn't resist. He sat her on the couch, fetched her a towel, then sat across from her as rain streaked the window like sorrow. "I got the call 10 minutes after I left the foundation office," she whispered. "Tom was driving me back from a donor meeting. I was checking emails. Sophie's school was listed in a traffic report." Jack leaned forward. "What happened?" "There was an accident near the school. A van jumped the curb, hit the sidewalk. There were kids." Jack's blood ran cold. "Sophie, No, she's okay. Evelyn exhaled hard. She'd already left for the day. But, seeing her name in the alert just for a moment, everything collapsed. I couldn't breathe. Jack's hand ran through his hair. I raced here without thinking, she continued. I had to see her, make sure she was real, that this life I chose wasn't just borrowed. Jack knelt in front of her, taking her hands. It's not borrowed. It's real. It's ours. Evelyn broke then, not into sobs, but something quieter. A single tear down her cheek. A sharp exhale. The collapse of every internal wall she had held since leaving that skyscraper life behind. I don't want to lose her, she whispered. Or you. You won't, Jack said firmly, unless you walk away again. I'm not walking, she said. I'm afraid. Every part of me that used to be sure, used to be in control. It's gone. Jack looked into her eyes. Good. Maybe now you can build something that won't fall apart when life hits back. She let out a shaky laugh. That sounds like something your daughter would say. Probably. He helped her up and into the bedroom where Sophie was already tucked in, pretending to be asleep. But when Evelyn leaned over to brush a hand through her hair, Sophie whispered, I knew you'd come. Evelyn kissed her forehead. I'll always come. Later that night, as Evelyn sat curled on the couch wrapped in one of Jack's old flannel shirts, she looked around the modest apartment. There were no polished floors, no private elevators, no designer wine racks. But there was something stronger than any of that. Roots. I've been so many things, she murmured. A daughter they dressed like a doll. A student who couldn't fail. A CEO who didn't have permission to cry. And now, for the first time, I'm just a person. And it terrifies me. Jack leaned beside her, their knees brushing. You're allowed to be terrified, but you're not allowed to give up. She nodded. So what now? You stop surviving, he said, and start choosing. Evelyn turned toward him. Then I choose this. I choose you. I choose Sophie. I choose late dinners and cold coffee and mismatched socks. I choose every part of this chaos if it means I get to come home to something real. Jack pulled her close, and for the first time since she left her boardroom life behind, Evelyn allowed herself to believe it that maybe she wasn't falling apart. Maybe she was falling into place. Outside, the storm began to ease, the wind dying into silence, the rain softening into mist. And somewhere between the quiet and the heartbeat beneath her ear, Evelyn found something she hadn't known she needed. Peace, not the polished, curated kind, but the kind that only lives in a home that forgives you for who you used to be and loves you anyway. It had been nearly a year since that cold night at the bus stop, the night that changed everything, though none of them had known it at the time. The old street lamp still flickered faintly at the corner of Henson and 12th, casting a soft amber glow on the sidewalk below. Spring had finally returned, bringing with it the scent of rain-drenched earth and blooming dogwoods that lined the neighborhood streets. Jack stood on the stoop of their building, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, watching Sophie skip ahead in her little white sneakers, a paper crown slightly askew on her head. Behind her, Evelyn walked with steady steps, her eyes bright, her smile quiet and sure. She looked every bit the woman she had become, no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer split between two worlds. She had chosen one, and stayed. The new community center had officially opened that morning. Not a flashy event, no red carpet, just neighbors' kids, volunteers, and a small brass plaque by the front door. The Hartwell Center for New Beginnings, founded by Evelyn Claire Hart in honor of Second Chances. Inside, it offered language classes, job training, childcare, and a modest free library. The startup funding had come from the final settlement Evelyn negotiated as she formally stepped down from Hartwell. Not to walk away bitter, but to walk away better. Jack had helped rebuild the building from its bones. Sophie had drawn every mural on the classroom walls. Together they had woven their quiet kind of magic into something permanent. And now, the evening after its grand opening, Evelyn had asked for one thing. To walk back to where it started, she said, "Full circle." So here they were, just three people walking slowly through the neighborhood with a memory in their bones and a future in their hands. When they reached the bus stop, Jack paused. It looked exactly the same. The bench, the broken glass in one corner, the faint rust on the signpost. But tonight it wasn't cold. It wasn't lonely. Evelyn reached out and ran her hand along the back of the bench. "I remember the way the wind sounded that night. I thought I was disappearing." Jack leaned beside her, brushing her hand gently with his own. "And you ended up being found." She turned toward him. "By you." Jack didn't answer. He didn't have to. His eyes said enough. Sophie plopped down on the bench and stretched her arms dramatically. "Can I tell people this is where my parents met?" Evelyn blinked. "Parents?" Sophie shrugged. "Well, not yet, but I'm working on it." Jack laughed. Evelyn tried to hide her smile, but it broke through anyway. "You're relentless. I learned from you," Sophie said proudly. There was a long, sweet silence. Then Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Jack blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, are you proposing to me?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Not yet." Inside the box was a delicate silver charm in the shape of a street lamp. "For you," she said, placing it in his hand. "For being the light that stayed on when everything else went dark." Jack swallowed hard. "I don't have a ring yet," he whispered, "but I've been carrying this around for months." He reached into his own coat pocket and pulled out a tiny folded piece of paper, creased, weathered, and familiar. Sophie's original map. 3 stick figures, a sun, a crown. "I never stopped carrying us," he said, unfolding it carefully. Evelyn stared at the drawing, tears welling. "You kept it." "You were never just a guest," he said. "You were always home." She leaned in and their lips met, not rushed, not dramatic, just quiet, warm, and certain. A promise sealed in breath and memory. Behind them, Sophie clapped her hands. "Okay, now can I say you're my family?" Jack and Evelyn looked at each other smiling, then said together, "Yes." They walked home slowly under the soft light of that old street lamp. No reporters, no press, just 3 hearts moving as one. Inside the apartment, the air smelled of roasted vegetables and something baking. Evelyn had picked up a new hobby, cooking with imperfection. Jack had given up judging her timing, and Sophie had become the designated taste tester. Later that night, with the dishes done and the couch a nest of pillows, Jack wrapped his arms around Evelyn while Sophie snored gently against them, her crown slipping sideways. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that night?" Evelyn whispered. Jack didn't need time to answer. "No, because you did stop. And that's the only version of the story I ever want." Evelyn closed her eyes, pressing her face into his shoulder. She no longer needed boardrooms or titles to feel whole. She had chosen love over legacy, grace over image, truth over safety. And in return, she had found a life that wasn't perfect but was undeniably hers, a life under the same streetlight, where she was finally seen, where she finally stayed, and where for the first time in her life she was never going to walk alone again. Where are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel and how they connect with hearts all over the world. If this story touched, you don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. There are many more heartfelt journeys waiting to be shared with you. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and take care.